those that are speakers, at this point, I'm just going to introduce you. You've got just 2 minutes to say who you are and broadly where you live and what you do, and before your main presentations. So John Good, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, hi everybody. It's great to be here. Really chuffed to be part of this. My name's John. I've got a wife and 2 bouncy boys, Dylan and Jake. I'm a Baptist pioneer minister, and I'm down in Hamworthy in Poole on a new housing estate. Yeah, that's probably enough for now, isn't it?
Brilliant, that's great. And Will, do you want to take yourself off mute and introduce yourself?
Yep. Hi everybody, I'm Will. I live in Stroud, Gloucestershire. Used to be a Baptist elder at the local church, but now I'm working outside of the Baptist church doing various bits of mission stuff. I've got a wife and 3 kids, I guess. If John's talking about his family, I should talk about mine. Yeah, looking forward to chatting to you guys and sharing what we've done and what we've learned.
Thank you, Will. And Matt.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Matt from sunny East Devon, Axminster. I am one of 3 directors of a company called Waffle. We're a social enterprise with a Christian heart. I should probably talk about my family too. I've got 4 kids, so I win, I think, at the moment. We just found out if I look tired, it's because our littlest has COVID. Just went into hospital, came back last night. He's fine. But if I look tired, I'm usually fairly bouncy, but I'll probably be less bouncy today, I think. But yeah, 4 very bouncy children and a lovely wife. Yeah, that's probably about it.
Thank you, Matt. Hayley, do you want to just mention what you are going to be highlighting as well?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the gentleman can't join us, but about 10 years ago in the Heart of England Baptist Association, there was a home mission church that had a dwindling congregation, and the minister went in and created a community centre. They do a community chip shop, and now it's a really vibrant centre of an estate in the Heart of England Baptist Association. So I'm going to be sharing a video from him, and I can loosely answer any questions around that. So that's what we'll be doing.
Thank you so much, Hayley. And so the rest of our time is going to be divided in this way. Each of those presenters that you have just introduced themselves will have 15 minutes to talk, and in 15 minutes it will be brief, about what they do in terms of engaging with the mission of God, what I guess inspired them to do what they're doing, and maybe the things that are good that they're doing, the things that they find challenging, the things that are just downright hard work about what they're doing, and then to just share a little bit of advice that they might want to pass on to the rest of us if we might be thinking about starting something like a missional entrepreneurship initiative. What advice would they give? It is only whetting the appetite, because then we've got breakout rooms, and you will get a choice of which presenter's breakout room you want to go in. This is not a popularity contest, but it is a genuine sense of if there's something that has sparked you from the presentations, something you've got questions about, to be able to go and chat with that presenter. Now, we recognise that some of you will want to chat with more than one presenter. And so actually, if you've got questions for others, when we come back into the main room again, we've got a decent amount of time, 25 minutes or more for Q&A, for questions and answers, which you can write in the chat box. So if your chat box is open, that will be really helpful for you to write thoughts and questions that you might have for particularly either for all the presenters or for particular ones. And Dave is going to chair that Q&A at the end before Alistair brings us to a close with some final concluding thoughts and some prayers. So that is the plan of action for the rest of our time together, with approaching 90 people in the room. After me saying at the beginning that people would be tempted by the beautiful sunshine and go out and do something else this morning, thank you for being here. I'm delighted that you are here, and I'll be praying the sunshine lasts, gets stronger, brighter and warmer for when this webinar's finished, so we can all get out and enjoy it afterwards. I'm going to introduce one at a time our presenters. I've not told them what order to go in, so I hope it's okay to do this. Matt, I was thinking maybe of starting with you. Is that all right? And so what I'm going to do is I'll spotlight Matt on the screen, and Matt, if you want to share anything, you should be able to do that. If everyone else can be on mute, that's really helpful. If you're not on mute already, then please do. And if not, I might well do it for you, just so that there's no interference in the background. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you so much for asking me to be here. It's absolutely brilliant. I'm particularly excited about getting to talk in the fullest sense about what I do. I think often I find myself talking about our social enterprise in pigeonholes, but today it feels like I can talk very freely about all that we do. So hopefully I can give you a good overview of our activities and what got us into this mess in the first place, and hopefully inspire some of you guys to get involved in this kind of thing, because I think some people were saying at the beginning, but I think there's a real groundswell at the moment towards being creative and innovative in terms of being able to speak the gospel in a language that our communities understand. So a bit about waffle then. So I love to waffle. I think one of the key things for me was that I realized that I can waffle quite well, and I wanted to honor the gifts that God had given me. And it all kind of came together about 3 years ago in a kitchen, as these things often do in very kind of ordinary beginnings. And it is effectively just one big pun waffle. So that in itself, I find really quite appropriate, because when I was being called to leadership, God kind of spoke to me through a pun in Jeremiah 1, which really helped me out. And I love language. I absolutely love language. And one of the things that I've noticed growing up in the church is that obviously the church has truth. It has the truth, but often coming from a language point of view and going to study languages, I was fascinated by the idea that actually things get lost in translation when it comes to talking with our community. So waffle is effectively just looking at trying to engage with our community in terms of how we have those conversations. We kind of recognize that as communities and as the church, we've in some senses lost the art of conversation. Not only that, I think we've lost the enthusiasm for it, and in many senses the opportunity to have conversations. So Tim and I, who are the three directors of Community Waffle House, we recognise that there is this growing social norm around kind of ignoring each other, effectively leaving each other alone. Woe betide you if you talk to me at the checkout, let alone knock on my door. And yet at the same time, there's this I'm sure we've all heard of it, aware of it, that there's this enormous trend around social isolation, around loneliness. Last time we counted, I think it's about 1 in 5 people globally, which is just, if you break that down in your communities, it's a staggering number of people that would describe themselves as often or always lonely. And it's not an easy thing to fix. And it's certainly not something that we have found easy, but it is something that began as a burden. And I think that's a really good place to start. If you're thinking about wanting to impact your community in some way, starting with a burden that God might put on your heart, it's a really good place to start. So yeah, there's a situation at the moment where we know that efficiency is king. Our communities are being stripped back of opportunities to have conversation, instead made all about doing things as fast as possible. Companies are making an economy out of our attention, so it's more easy than ever to get distracted. I think we all know that. So I guess all of that boils down to the fact that perhaps it's never been harder to strike up conversations with new people. And you might say, well, that doesn't really matter. We might think coming into about a year of not having the conversations in the same way that we have done, that actually that's fine. And do we need face-to-face communication anymore? Is that important? Well, I mean, on many different levels, there's a lot of research that shows just how important it is to have face-to-face communication, not just with people that you would class as your strong ties, so your family and friends, but weak ties, your baristas, your shop clerks. So just on a purely sociological level, one of the most important things you can ever do in your life is go from 0 friends to 1 friend. And for a lot of us, we might be privileged enough never to be so far in our lives, be in a position where we've had the rug pulled out from under our feet and we're in a position where we don't really have any meaningful friendships. But there are, as I said, lots of people in our communities where that is their normal. And going from 0 friends to 1 friend is very important. But making friendships is also very difficult and not something that you can grow in a test tube. We know that every friendship starts with a slightly awkward conversation. That's just the way it is. You can't get around it. Every single friendship starts with a slightly awkward friendship conversation. So if you want to make friendships, you have to make conversations. And a lot of us are losing the confidence and the art of doing that, I think. From a church point of view, we know also that too often our churches look far too much like us. Many in our churches don't feel confident talking to people from different backgrounds, or they simply just don't have the opportunity. They don't make the opportunity to mix with people that aren't like them and make unlikely friendships. So we started Waffle with a pretty simple vision. None of it's rocket science, and we say that very often whenever we're talking to people about this, that it's not rocket science for us. And it's also, it's not something that we're saying that we can fix entirely ourselves. But we had the simple vision to put some intentionality back into everyday conversations, and at the same time put any profits back into our community. So my mum, she had a saying which was keep it simple, stupid. She used to tell me that. She knew me better than anyone. And so really, I think simplicity is one of those things that I would say is really key when you're thinking about these things, is not trying to make things overly complicated. So rather than reinventing the wheel, we realized that there was already a very successful model for daytime community spaces, and that's called Costa or Starbucks or whatever your local chain is. That's where people mix and they merge, and caffeine is the social lubricant. And so we didn't want to reinvent the wheel with that. So our Waffle House is very much, if you came in Axminster, would very much look like a cafe. But we are absolutely fascinated by the idea of what these spaces could look like, what are called third spaces, what they could look like if they were driven by community rather than commerce. So that's what we do. We start by making sure our business model has margin for people to have conversations. So we have a mix of volunteers and staff and work experience kids, and we train them all up. And actually, although we're called Waffle, the training that we do is around listening. So trying to start up those conversations naturally and then sit back and listen to people. And we are awful at listening. It's one thing, the more I do this, the more I realize in myself and others, we're just terrible listeners. And listening is such an important discipline. Sadly, possibly still true in churches as well, that listening, we still think we should give answers more than ask questions and listen. So yeah, we train our staff to do that. There's an intentionality behind what we do, and then we take that training also into organizations and schools. And in schools, we train out Waffle Ninjas, which is quite a lot of fun. And then with these core elements in place, we use this Waffle House, which also we now have a Waffle Play and a Waffle Work element. And it's a completely free to access community base from which we host community groups. That's a little bit of what we do. But then we also create our own groups, games clubs. We've got a tech surgery to help predominantly older people with their tech. It's just an excuse to waffle. We've got a mental health support group and a few other groups as well, and anything basically that will bring people together. We also do some community outreach work, and we've got some funding for that, which is great. So we get to go out and do community gardening and all sorts of things. I want to kind of focus. How am I doing for time? All right. I love the idea. I got sent through just a very brief kind of suggestion for a structure, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it was really good as an opportunity to really think through it for myself. If you're thinking like what social enterprise for mission, for church, and I have to say, like, it's a real honor to be in this room, this virtual room with some guys, Barney and Sarah and Carl and Kay and Ben, lots of guys that have really inspired me to kind of take the plunge on this, because there is a lot of risk involved in kind of doing things a little bit different. It's not the easiest place to be, but it's been great to have that support. The good then, why do this? Why do mission in this way? Well, what we found just from a purely a kind of a business point of view is that being a social enterprise, it gives you stability, agility, and sustainability. We talk about it in those three ways. So stability in the sense that you've got multiple revenue streams. So we're not just relying on funding. We try and stand on our own 2 feet in terms of the business and hopefully make some profits and put back into the community. But then we apply for funding to be able to do kind of extra projects on top. So it gives us a stability. Our model, community interest company that we've gone there are a few different models you can go for in social enterprising enterprising world. But we've gone for a community interest company, and that basically operates in many ways like a limited company. So you get all the kind of freedom and agility that you would with having your own company. So we've got three directors, and we largely make the decisions, which it does bring in, we've talked about, and we've made sure that we've got good accountability around us, but it does mean that we can make decisions fairly quickly, which I think especially at the moment during COVID was really handy, because we could kind of launch new projects quite quickly and move around. So it gives you agility, stability, and all of that kind of means that there's a more chance that you'll stick around, which I think when you're looking at community stuff is super important, that you are sustainable, that you can be there for a while. Obviously, we're all about relationships and friendship building, and that doesn't happen overnight, and that takes time. So I think you need to be in it for the long run. So that's one of the really good things. Another really good thing of being involved in the business world is that business, I think in many senses, is the new church. It's where people find their purpose and their meaning. So being involved in the business world, actually you get access to a whole new world of people that you would just ordinarily wouldn't necessarily get access to. So just on that level, it kind of opens up your sphere of influence into kind of a much wider field. And we do just get to have real conversations. I would say that's the bottom line, is that when I look around at churches, I think often churches are absolutely brilliant at taking people from like interested to alpha course to whatever to fully, dunked and signed up, and theologically I know none of that's right. I can't see you all, but I can feel the shaking of heads. But you know what I mean, that kind of taking people from interested to kind of across the line, if you will. But I think one thing that in churches we could definitely do more of is just going and meeting people and where they are. And I know that's something that this is all about, this whole, Ricole and the Baptist Union are really passionate about that. So we do get to do that. We get to meet with real people on their own terms, with no strings attached, no religious baggage, as they would describe it, which means that we can then really build some great relationships. So the bad, this was actually not as hard to think about as I thought. The biggest one for me, and it's great that I can really talk about this today, is that it's something that we talk about time and time again at Waffle, is like, how do we make sure that we are doing all things for all people, so that by all means all would be one for the gospel. I think that's wanting to make sure that we are driven by the gospel, even as we aren't set up as a religious organization, as it were, but we are all driven by the same desire to see people meet with Jesus and just understand his life transforming power, and so that's how we don't get lukewarm with that or lost in that. I think is probably one of the biggest things about doing mission in a social enterprising sense that is tough. It's staying true to your calling, wherever that would be in your context, and making sure that we are for us that we are communicating the gospel. Obviously for us, we've got kind of, for most social enterprises, there is a business element and a charity element, if you like. And whilst I've said that can be really good, it also can pull you in two different directions, and making sure that one doesn't kind of run the show more than the other. You end up kind of doing all the business stuff, and the kind of charity or community side gets kind of left behind. Or equally, you've got some great ideas, you want to help people, but then you realize your business isn't working. So it can feel sometimes like it moves in two different directions. And also just communicating the vision to people. It can actually be, when you're doing two things at once, as it were, like we are at Waffle, it can be tough sometimes to make people understand what you're about, and communicating that vision. And then just failure. That's one of the bad things. If you don't like failure, it's probably not for you. I say that I don't like failure at all. I've got some real insecurities around failure. At least I did have, me did have that, and so this has been a real training ground for me to kind of get used to going, okay, God, I'm going to give this a go. But yeah, failure is almost inevitable in some sense, and unless I think you define success, allow God to define success and failure, I think that can be tricky ground. So that's obviously super important, is that you kind of give the whole thing constantly to God. Yes, and then lastly, the ugly. So I came from a business world into a community world, and I thought it would be less competitive. Turns out that's not true. The community world is as competitive, if not more. There's lots of people vying for the same amount of money. and it was really interesting to come in as a newbie and just watch that from a distance for a while. So I think competitiveness in the community world is one of the uglier sides of it, that you have to kind of negotiate. It's kind of, for me, that adds the challenge that I have to make sure that I'm doing things for the right reason and not trying just to compare myself with other people and our company with other people, and really stick to what we want to do. But yeah, that is a tough one, and or at least it's something that we found tough, is kind of finding your place. And then one thing that we found really helpful is turning potential competitors into partners. I think it's a really good technique. I guess that kind of comes under advice, but something that we've learned is that if you spot somebody, you think, they could feel like their toes are trodden on, obviously always communicate, but also if you can partner with people wherever possible, I think that's really good. Turning friends into business partners is not as easy as it sounds. That's another ugly side, if you like. Me, Sophie and Tim are really good friends. We're better friends now than we were, but it's been hard. It's been hard. There are conversations you never would have as friends that you have to have as business partners, and there's money involved. So yeah, that's something worth thinking about. If you're doing it with people that you like, and you love, hopefully, then it's worth thinking about the cost, weighing up the cost, as obviously Jesus tells us to do. And then just lastly, PR versus pride. I think that for me is a big one we're still kind of working out, is when do we push what we're doing? How do we you're in a world with social entrepreneur where everyone wants you to measure impact and tell you how, we get asked, like, are people less lonely when they come in the Waffle House? I mean, how do you measure that? I mean, are people, people wanting to fill out questionnaires and all sorts. And so trying to work out what impact is good to measure, and when you're just basically showing off, or when it's just pride. I think that's been a kind of something that we've had to kind of battle with and talk about as three directors. So yes, that leaves me, hopefully I'm kind of at the 15-minute mark-ish. Advice, actually, I had a few things, and then I just kind of whittled it down to one. And this has really helped us steer ourselves over the last kind of few years. It's a phrase we keep coming back to, and we say people over project. I was thinking about it this morning, actually, and it was it kind of is the first time I've ever thought about this, but I was thinking of when Jesus says, like, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? And I was thinking about non-profit from that sense. But actually this whole thing is completely non-profit if you're going to lose your soul in the process, if you're going to kind of compromise your character, if you can't do it with love, literally don't bother, don't start. These things have been a big challenge to us, but this people over project, and remembering that we never want to try and push the project to the extent at which we're kind of treading over people, and not looking after the people close to us. So we start with our staff, we start with our volunteers and our work experience guys, we start with us three as directors, and make sure we're loving each other, because we know that if we can't do that, then it's just pointless. And just to finish with the story, when we were setting up, for the first time, we've moved since, and we're in a place in the middle of Axminster. We were kind of super busy with all this kind of project planning and stuff, and we realized, it was just a moment when we realized that we were a company that was set up all for having these conversations, and we were ignoring every single delivery driver that came in and dropped parcels off. And we just had this moment where we were like, this kind of starts now. If we can't do it now, if we really believe that these small conversations can change lives, that actually we need to start modeling this now. And it was a real kind of moment for us where we realized that actually, even in the setting up of your project, even in the thinking about your project, it's already begun. And not to lose sight of why you're doing it. What's the big why? And not to get so carried away with the project that you forget the people that God actually called you to serve and to reach. And that's been important for us as we go along as well. So hoping that's about 15 minutes there.
Pretty much spot on 15 minutes, actually. Thank you, Matt. That's inspiring stuff. There's comments that are coming in, Matt. You might want to look at them. We're not going to answer those questions at the moment, but they are logged in the chat box, and it might be something that either we pick up on in breakout rooms, or we come back to in Q&A later on. I've just kind of put two questions there that it's worth having in mind as we're hearing all the presentations. which are, what did you find most encouraging or inspiring about the presentation? You don't have to write all of these things in the chat box unless you'd like to, but just so that this hopefully the journey of this morning is fruitful for us. And if there was one question that came to mind as you were listening to the presentation, what was it? And some of you have already logged and listed those questions at the moment. So I'm going to introduce Will in just a second, but just for a second, what was encouraging, inspiring about that presentation? And then also, there might be more than one question, but what are the questions that were raised in your mind as you were listening to Matt speak? I've put a link there to the Waffle House's Facebook page. Do take a look. Matt, stick whatever else is helpful in the chat box as well for people to look up what it looks like. Been a fairly major renovation over this lockdown period and a change of premises, which has been huge. And I've not been to the new place yet because we're not able to move, but I can't wait to get to it. If it's anything like the old place, it'll be awesome. So it certainly extended quite a lot of the mission you were talking about, Matt, in terms of play area and work area and different spaces, because you've got more space available now. And it's a great story, I guess, of a social enterprise with a community focus being able to scale up from where you started in terms of the space available. So maybe that'll be something for questions later on. Brill. So we're not gonna do too much more at this point in time, but what I would like to do is introduce to you Will. Will, you've got screen share capabilities, so please share anything you want to. Don't feel obliged, but if there's anything particularly you would like to, then do, and go for it. You got 15 minutes.
Thanks, Carl. Morning, everyone. So my name's Will. I live near Alistair in Gloucestershire. And my day job, I've got 2 day jobs. One of them is running a set of social enterprises that are owned by a big group called the Grace Network. The Grace Network is a bit like Unilever in as much as it's got one, that's the brand behind it all, but we have 5 subsidiary businesses that we run. So we have a furniture business, a kids clothing business, a restaurant, a bike delivery business, we also have a sports business and a house clearance business. So we've got a bunch of businesses that all happen on one big site just outside Stroud. If you're interested, you can go on thegracenetwork.org.uk and have a look at that, rather than me waffle on about that. Matt's got the word waffle stuck in my head now. And if you want to know more about how that all works, you can sign up to our newsletter list again. I've been to loads of these conferences when some douche at the front spends hours telling you all the stuff they did, and then you don't really know how to do any of it because it was so far ahead. So that's what the business side. But my other half, my other day job is running what we're trying to call a modern day monastery. So I used to be a elder in a local Baptist church, but I now work with the Diocese of Gloucester, and we're running a new bishop's mission order. So their equivalent of a pioneer project called Wayfarers Monastery. And that's seeking to use the spaces we have at work to create monastic living. So I'm going to put a couple of resources in the chat box because I think I may as well give you some intelligent stuff. So I've nicked some resources off a really clever chap called George Lings. And George Lings works for the Church Army, and he's done a load of research about how monastic models work and how they can connect with churches. So I'm just uploading that to the chat now. He wrote a pamphlet called 7 Sacred Spaces. I read the pamphlet about 3 years ago and it blew my mind. And we now are using the framework of 7 Sacred Spaces to develop almost like, I always like to call it like a gym for the human soul. So these 7 spaces represent different parts of human existence. And if you live in all 7 well, you end up having quite a healthy life. And if you don't have them all well, you end up with an unbalanced life. So we use that 7 Sacred Spaces model to try and build a monastic community. So we have about 40 people that are part of that monastic community, and about another 85 who are part of the businesses and connected to those businesses. So we've got about 120 odd people that all live in those spaces. And then 2/3 aren't Christian or aren't followers of like disciples, but it's a really combined group. And we use the 7 spaces as a neutral set of venues to operate and live in together. So have a look at that PDF that I've uploaded. And again, we can talk about it offline if people are interested in the specifics. So rather than just talk about what we do, I thought I'd try and give you 3 of four ideas or bits that were useful. And just to be annoying, I based them all on quotes from Confucius, because my mum gave me this lovely book the other day of Confucius quotes. Handsome chap, isn't he? He wouldn't have done well in a Zoom world. So I thought, just to be controversial, I'd use quotes that you probably don't use much in churches to try and help them. So the first quote of Confucius is, "Before you embark on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves." Very famous quote. And it always reminds me of my challenges of when I was a pioneer in church versus a pioneer out of church. Normally, both those two bits kill each other, because the church wants to stay like church, hate the pioneers, and the pioneers hate the church people, because you're always bickering about whether you should be missional, and you have all these theological debates. And I think actually in reality, Confucius had it right. If you want to bicker and fight between pioneers and non-pioneers, we're just going to fall out. And so there's a phrase or a theological concept of modal and sodal. And those two phrases, I think, are really helpful for us as we try and consider how we be pioneers post lockdown and all that stuff. So modal is that word that means like the mean, the mode. And the theory is that mode is the customary way things are done. Now, most pioneers basically spend their entire life moaning at the old, saying the mode is broken. But if we accept that actually there are 2 different types, mode being the main way of doing it, and the word sodal comes from the Latin word sodalis, I'm told, which is translated as comrade. And so they're often talked about water and fire. So sodal methods are very hot, and they're like almost like an army on a job together. And one of the key things that I've learned is that if we accept that pioneering and church are actually quite different, you'll have a much better chance of understanding where you sit. So one of my bits of advice is to say, if you're going to be a pioneer, don't try and do it modally. Don't try and pioneer in the midst of a church that's doing its church stuff. All you'll do is upset yourself and each other. And we have to start to accept as churches that there are different types of people that are working for God's kingdom. Some of that modal model. And to be fair, the Anglicans have it well placed, because they have the model of the parish, which is a very modal model, which is the parish needs to be there to bury, marry, and baptize people, which is quite mundane, everyday stuff. But we need monks who are much more sodal to go out into that parish and spread the mission of God. So that's my first point, is Google modal and sodal. And again, I've got another PDF that I will upload as well, which talks a bit more about it. And I think if you use that language, it can start to explain why there's a difference between pioneering and non-pioneering, and maybe we can all get on with each other. So moving on from that, my second Confucian quote is, let's get it here. The second quote is, "A lion chased me up a tree, and I greatly enjoyed the view from the top." Now, the problem we all have as churches is if you do the counting of both money and people, we are slowly dying as churches corporately. But that isn't the first time the church has had that problem. In the Dark Ages, we had trouble. And in other times, we've had all sorts of trouble. So I'm not particularly unduly worried. I don't think God's church is going anywhere, but lots of our institutions of church are in trouble. It feels like we've been chased by a lion up a big tree. And my suggestion to this group, for those of you thinking about pioneering, is you might need to start thinking about in church and out of church. So recognizing that the church structures that we often inherit maybe aren't that good anymore. Maybe a lion is chasing us and we have to climb higher. But then suddenly, as we've done that, so many of us have actually seen a real opportunity. Listening to Matt is such an exciting opportunity. Rather than set up a cafe in the church, they've just gone right out of it, set up an actual business, and off they go. And so I think for lots of us, as we're considering how we come back from lockdown, we'll really want to think about that in church, out of church. I think there are loads of models that you can use to do mission in church as well as out of church. And I'll upload one more little picture here. In fact, it's such a good one, I might even upload it in a minute. And I think for lots of us doing missional pioneering, if we learnt to accept that we're working outside of church in that main sense, we'd have a lot better time with ourselves. And this is a little diagram that I stole from somebody else that talks about all different models of how we can pioneer church. And it sounds like what Matt does, and probably what I'm doing, is this kingdom-orientated social enterprise. Once you accept that you're not in church, the conversation with church can be much nicer. Because suddenly you're talking about working outside of it. You're not trying to destroy or replace everything that's going on, but rather you're saying, you're a modal model. We need that. We need to bury, we need to worship regularly. All these things are important. But actually, some of us are called to go outside of the church, like the monks of old, and get stuck in. So I think that's one of my bits of advice to anyone thinking about mission is, do you want to do it in church, which is fine. You can look here about messy church and cafe church on the left, or are you going to do it outside of church? And if you know which one you are, you'll probably have much clearer language and be much less offensive to each party. Because I spent years being friends with no one, either in church or out of church, because I was always in the two. And so my advice is to think about that. The other third quote I've got for you is, if you plan for 1 year, plant rice. If you plan for 10 years, plant trees. But if your plan is for 100 years, educate children. Another Confucian quote. And I think what we have to recognize as church is, we need to plan for 100 years. Every time you care about the next 5 years, you're missing out the fact that the world's unfolding at a very slow, steady rate. And so we actually need to think about what's our long-term destination, which is something about redeemed communities, something about the Lordship of Christ. There's a whole load of ways we could describe our destination. But in reality, there is no end to that journey, right? We're not going to get to a point in 5 years and go, oh, job done, we can all chill out now. Maybe if the rapture happens or the sky splits in half and Jesus returns, that might be all right. But for years to come, one would imagine we've got to work. And I think Matt touched on this. Basically, there's no end in sight. So what we are now is part of our mission. So by that, I mean, if I'm so angry and upset with church that I'm really difficult and off I go to try and fix it, normally that fact that I'm not focusing on my own discipleship fundamentally cuts away at my own mission work. So I want to give advice to anyone looking at that mission stuff, is the journey starts with myself personally. Am I getting closer to God each day? Do I enjoy going to my 7 spaces? Does my businesses that we run make me feel closer to Christ? If that's the start, then that's good. Is my community day by day living out that reality? And then finally, is my church living it out? And I think too often with pioneer work, we can be really target driven or really passionate about getting the gospel out there. And I've seen so many of us burn out because actually we haven't looked after the fact that it's a day by day journey. And I think that Confucian phrase says, depending on your timeline, you take very different actions. So if you just want to fix your church up and try and get a few more people in, you might hire a new minister, you might refurb the place, which is one of those shorter term 10-year plans. But if you really want to see kingdom growth, we need to be discipling people properly. And that starts with me. So the first trick I do, we have this thing called cell, one of the sacred spaces, which is that space between me and God. It's the most old school concept of just praying every day by yourself, right? It's sort of so out of date, it's almost boring to say it. But I've discovered that since I've practiced that, my personal life and my discipleship life gets stronger. And that allows me then to move forwards and work with others. So I would really encourage people to think about those 3 points. One, that concept of modal and sodal. Perhaps there are different forms of church that we should be in. Some of us are here to do the mean, the average, and some of us are here to be sent out like troops into a battle to search out for more. Secondly, are we in church or working out of church? In the dark ages, as the church was falling apart because the Romans had left and the Vikings kept coming and all sorts of stuff, it was the monasteries that actually ended up holding the spark of the gospel for the next generation. So perhaps you'll find that the gospel is held not in churches for a few years, but maybe outside of the church in groups that are more monastic. And thirdly, always remember that the journey is in the destination. So you don't get to a place. The journey is what you are. What I am today is part of my kingdom living. And so that's really, really important if you want to be getting on with this stuff. So just finally, for the last couple of minutes, I just wanted to talk a bit about how we actually do it. What does Wayfarers and Grace Network do? Well, I've been interested for years in that phrase, Luke 4, where Jesus talks about setting the captives free and letting the blind see in the year of the Jubilee. And it always struck me that was like his manifesto. So we actually have that quotes in and on everything we do, and not literally everything, but all over the place. And we ask ourselves every day, is what we're doing today going to make the kingdom more apparent? Are people going to see? Are the blind going to be given their sight? Are the captives going to be set free? And a bit like how Matt described, I started that 9-10 years ago, running a little food bank here in Stroud. And by asking that question every day, we've been able to basically iterate and change and morph. And here we are now with about £1 million worth of social businesses and a mini monastery growing and a big set of warehouses that make a difference to lots of different people. And so again, my final bit of advice would be for people to really think about which part of the gospel really, really excites you. Because some people it'll be about justice, some it'll be about loneliness, some it'll be about evangelism, some it'll be about teaching. And if you can get some angle that really gets you going, then you'll be able to iterate and do stuff. If you're trying to copy some other person's book, you'll probably fail quite quickly. We've all read like books from the early noughties, some like, is it Francis Chan or whatever the cool one was a few years ago, and I used to read those books. And you sort of pick up his vision and you try and model it and copy it. Well, what I've worked out is pick a bit of the Bible that really speaks to you and just crack on with it. And I find that really helpful because I can ask that question. And my final picture to share with you, if I can find it, is we've actually set our, let's see this here. We've actually set our concept up, what we call 7 sacred planets. So you can't really see this very well. We have Luke 4 here in the middle, if you can see that. And each of our 7 sacred spaces are orbiting it like planets around a solar system. The energy of our work comes from reflecting on that Luke 4 piece. And all our 7 spaces are orbiting that. And so it means that all of our meetings, whether it's a gathering for food, whether it's our businesses, whether it's the way we make decisions, are all at varying distances from the intensity of that Luke 4 gospel. And one thing that I've really found helpful for me is find that word that really matters to you and then find out ways of embodying it, which is these 7 sacred planets, as we often call them. So I'm probably going to stop there. I'm happy to take questions later and in the small groups. And if people want to email me, they can do that as well. But my main thing to say is be bold. There's plenty of God's power left, even if our churches sometimes look like he doesn't live there anymore. He isn't dead, he's alive. And we should be excited by that.
Will, that was outstanding. Thank you so much. Massively inspired by that. A whole kind of monastic rhythms and new monasticism is something that I personally have had an interest in for quite some time. So yeah, what you're saying is definitely ringing my bell. I don't want to rush on just between presentations. I'm aware of the fact that there's a lot of information that is being flung out at the moment. So I do want just to give a little bit of a moment between each presentation for you to breathe, those of us that are listening, and just to consider what was inspiring and encouraging about what Will just presented. And what were the questions that came to mind about the presentation as well. Write them in the chat box if you want, or hold them, and you've got the opportunity to go in the breakout room with Will in a second to ask them. But like I say, we've got a plenary question and answer session as well that'll be towards the end of our time together. So it'd be good for us to hear those things, but just a chance to have some headspace, take a breath, consider what God might be saying through what Will's been sharing. And then in just a minute, I'm going to introduce to you Johnny.
I'm just going to share that last slide, Carl, if that's all right.
Please do. Yeah, go for it.
And I also missed out my favorite new Confucius quote, which was maybe the last one. The hardest thing of all is to find a black cat in a dark room, especially if there is no cat. So I was going to ask the question about whether people's churches actually have anything worth finding in them anymore, but that's a bit rude. I'm sure most do, but that's where that Luke 4 bit comes in. We always ask ourselves, is there anything at the core of this that's actually worth following? And that's where we find that Luke 4 is meant to be a white cat in a light room, I guess, rather than an impossible to find truth. So sorry about that, forgot that.
No, that's all right, that's good. I clearly remember a conversation with an Anglican priest who was talking about the things that have become traditional within the liturgical pattern in the Anglican Church. I would argue it's the same for all church denominations, not just Anglican. But her particular thing was that you stand and you turn to face the gospel and bow your head when the gospel is read. And in her church, the lectern was, as you look at the front on the left-hand side, until one Christmas, because of the nativity scene, she moved it to the right-hand side. But everyone still stood, turned to the left and bowed their head to the left, which was actually turning their back on the gospel. It's easy for us to get into ways of doing things without knowing why we're there. And maybe just this lockdown period has given us a chance to actually reappropriate some of the things that we've been doing with actually why we did them in the first place, and are they still relevant, and do we need to go back to them, or ought we in fact go back to some of them? So that's really helpful what you've just said. Okay, bro. So I encourage you to download those documents and the picture that Will has shared. And now I'm going to hand over to John. John, the floor is yours for the next 15 minutes, bro.
Brilliant, thank you. Let me share my screen with you guys if I can. There we go. Can you see something there?
Good.
Excellent, excellent. Hey, look, I am really inspired by the last two speakers actually, and I've got a bunch of questions for them myself. So delighted to be here, and I'm not as far down the line as those guys. So I just thought it would be great to share some of my story and where I'm at with the Water Sports Library. So I'll start again with my family. Here's my wife Mim and my two boys Dylan and Jake, and I wanted to say, I guess, that I was a pastor in Luton for 7 years before I moved down south. And one of the things that has taken me by surprise about the move to pioneering is that both my family and my interests are much more central and combined with my ministry, which perhaps in the past they haven't been as much. They've been more peripheral. I'm a passionate surfer. We both love the waves. I've been surfing since I was like 19, and the water has played a massive part in my own life, and in terms of worship, peace, challenge, life and death stuff. I encounter God in the water, and that's become a hobby, has become quite central in what I'm doing now, and I think that's quite an important. That's been quite a big change for me. We moved to Hamworthy in 2019, and one of the things that we noticed straight away was this is one of the houses that's by us, and you can just take a stroll 2 minutes away and you'll find houses like this all over the place, quite casually, with a boat parked next to a car. And this is like indicative, I think, of the area that I live in. Heaps of people just have watercraft that's just like hanging around outside their buildings. And as me and Mim just started going for lunches and dinners with people, and we realised that inside people's houses and garages there was all kinds of other stuff as well: paddle boards, kayaks, there was surfboards, wetsuits, buoyancy aids, all kinds of bits and pieces that people just have kicking around here. But then also, pool really differs from street to street, and so there were these other places that are still really near us, where people can't afford access to water sports equipment that's on their back. They can't afford to go out into the water and use equipment, which, considering the harbour is on their backyard, is an absolute travesty in my mind. But it also raised questions for us about other social issues. Water sports equipment isn't crazy expensive in my mind, but for some people it really was. And when the sun shines here as well, I don't know, for some of you guys living in coastal areas, you'll recognise this, like, pool is massively seasonal. As soon as the sun starts shining, everybody is out. They're on bikes, they're out with the kids, they're out on the water, they're out on boats. And we were like, there is just something in the air here about the water, about health, about green spaces, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, and that just kind of combined a load of questions in my own mind about the water. The first one obviously was theological. Can God work outside on the water? For years, one of my favourite stories in the Bible has been the story of Jacob, when he goes to that place called Uz and he rests his head on a pillow there on the stone, and he has the escalator dream with the angels coming up and down from heaven. And then he wakes up, and at the end of it, he says, like, surely God was in this place and I was not aware of it. And I just love that, because for me, ever since reading, like Mission Shaped Church and all those kind of things, way back, well, I think that came out in 2004 or something, I'm so passionate about the idea of God not just living in places that are unexpected, but actually working in places that are unexpected. What does it mean that God is in the office or in the park or in the pub or whatever? I love all that. So my question is, I guess, can God work out on the water? Could people worship him out there? What does it mean that he's healing people? I read an amazing book. You should check it out. If you love water, check out Blue Mind, which is all about the physical and the mental health properties of water, what it does to people to increase health. It's an amazing book. So yeah, I've got all kinds of theological questions about, like, what can God do with water? Then I had a more social question about, like, is there a way to make water sports cheaper and more accessible for people? How can we equalise the gap between the people who live in sandbanks, for instance, down the road, who have heaps of money and heaps of gear, and get everybody out on the water? We wanted to create something that was financially sustainable. Matt mentioned, you know, with the Waffle House, that a business needs to make money. And also the opportunity around making money is that you can reinvest back into the local community. So I think as well, from being a church minister, I had questions around sustainability and giving. And I was kind of, I guess I wanted to test out for myself whether there could be an alternative to people giving. By the way, I'm not anti-giving. I have been supported, you know, by grants for the last few years, and so I'm very grateful for it. But I'm excited actually by the challenge of becoming financially sustainable. And not only that, I really think that the church could lead the way in terms of talking about money and talking about finance into the future. I think there's a massive opportunity for the church to speak into investing and money. But that's another thing. Could we do social good with this? Is there, you know, I think there's an environmental aspect to water sports. Ironically, wetsuits, fiberglass, you know, paddle boards, all the stuff that goes into water sports, both at the beginning end of production and at the end of production, are terrible for the environment. I also have a real problem with ownership. I don't think we all need to own a boat. I don't think we all need to own a paddle board or a surfboard or whatever it might be. So yeah, I had a question around the environment. I think that social trust could increase if we were able to share water sports equipment. And then lastly, I had questions around, I'm sure some of you are aware of the community or the charity model ABCD, asset-based community development, which is something that I've been reading about in the last few years, which says that, you know, potentially charity has, one of the downsides is that it turns the people who are doing the charity have power, and it turns the people who don't have, who are on the tail end, turns them into clients. Whereas actually, how can we get to a stage where we start with not the lack in community, but the strengths in community, and how can we begin to mobilise people's strength and what they already have? What are they bringing to the table? You know, even the poorest people in our communities, like, you know, have heaps to bring to the table. And I wanted to create something which was, yeah, sustainable and brought everybody into a sense of equality, I guess. And so we landed on this idea of the water sports library. So for ages, I've been really inspired by the Edinburgh Tool Library. They're sort of, they were saying, you know, not everybody needs a lawnmower, not everybody needs their own power tools, that kind of thing. And now they've grown a community inventory of equipment. And I think they've got like over 3,000 pieces of kit. And the idea is, you know, you sign up, you become a member for a year. And then once you've signed up, you can you borrow the gear that's in this community inventory. And I've just loved that idea. And so I said, well, let's just try and do it with water sports equipment. So we begged, borrowed and stole a load of paddle boards, a load of kayaks. We got people to, we got churches to donate stuff, got individuals giving bits and pieces. We were able to buy a few bits. And we got to the stage now where I think we're up to about 160 bits of gear, all told. So it's basically like a great big pile of gear. If I stop sharing for a second, or actually, how do I chat? I can't seem to chat and share. oh, there's the chat. So if I just stick the link in here, you'll be able to, if you click on that link, you'll be able to go to our website and have a little look at what we've got in there. And yeah, so feel free to have a little look. I'll just get this presentation back up. Can you all see a chat like right in the middle of my presentation, or is it, I've got a chat box there. Can you see just the picture?
Yeah, no, that's fine. We can just see the picture.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so like Will, we are a CIC. We chose to become, that's a business rather than a charity. And again, similar to Matt, we wanted the flexibility of a CIC. One of the things about a community interest company is that you have to lock your assets somewhere. You have to lock them into the local community. And so we are attached to the local Anglican church. So were we to go under down the line, I should imagine the local community church will end up with a ton of water sports equipment that they then have to work out what to do with. And obviously off the back of this, what we wanted to do really was get to know people. People would borrow equipment. The idea of a library isn't that people just turn up once or twice. You know, we get to know people as they begin to borrow. We talk to them about their experiences out on the water. We give people sort of starter and tasters out there. And then off the back of that, hopefully to develop some Christian community. We weren't able to do all that much. We launched in May last year. And so we were only able to do one retreat, but it went very well. But we've got ideas for quiet days, more retreats, a SUP club where we can get to know people, and then even children's spirituality stuff, you know, putting on stuff around similar to Messy Church perhaps, but encouraging wonder and story and getting children using the equipment and experiencing God out on the water rather than just learning about him. How do we get on? You can see from that we, oh man, I can't get rid of this chat box. It's annoying me. They're the numbers anyway from last year. About 170 people signed up. We had a load of successful loans. A ton of people gave bits and pieces to the library, and it was great. Really, really surprised us, to be honest. We had no idea how it would go. It was a complete experiment. And some of the stories that came back were just brilliant. Like people have said that they had very little confidence in general. For instance, one lady I'm thinking of, she's got 2 kids, yeah, she just said to us how grateful she was just to be able to learn how to work a kayak, work a paddleboard. She borrowed loads of times, came back and back and back. And each time she said it was a real effort for me to go online to book these things out. But actually getting here, getting out on the water has made all the difference to my mental health today. And that's been brilliant. She came on our retreat. She had an opportunity to pray. We did some contemplative prayer exercises like out on the water and stuff. And her and another few people who don't know Jesus were having pictures, and yeah, it's just been great. I've been really, really encouraged by it so far. Some of the barriers, some of the difficulties to getting into the business was that I didn't have an experience, particularly of business. I didn't know how to run a business. I went on the Matrishka House course, and that was brilliant. That really helped. That was a week-long residential. But I feel the lack of experience most of the time when I'm in the library. There is stuff that crops up every single day, and I just think, actually, I just don't know how to do that. Very recently, we've been awarded a national lottery grant, which will enable us to take on an extra staff member. And the YMCA have offered us a second base for this year. So I'm just trying to work out, how do you employ someone? How does all that work? How do you interview? How do you, I'm trying to work all that sort of stuff out for myself. Another barrier was money. We didn't have much money at all when we started this off, and the library was really minimal, just a handful of gear, and that was, part of the adventure. There was no model apart from the tool library and some of the libraries of things which I went to visit. There isn't a model to follow, around around libraries of things and kind of Christian missional community, I guess. So I'm kind of trying to work out how to combine that as I go along. Not knowing if it's going to work. Yeah, I mean, you just have general confidence issues when you start something like this. I think you just feel like, well, why am I doing this? Is it a waste of my time? Is it a waste of the resource that I've been given? Oftentimes these things like happen as a result of, like, you know, a grant, somebody else is paying your time, and so you feel a sense of guilt, you know, if this thing doesn't work out. Oh yeah, and that's my last point there. And then the advice I got given, I cannot get rid of this chat, so I can't read it to you. But basically, I grew up with a very strange notion that stewardship was a kind of more biblical principle than risk. And now I really think that life in all its fullness lies on the other side of fear. I believe that about relationships. I believe that about ministry. I believe that about all sorts of things. If you can't get rid of the fear, just do it scared, would be my one piece of advice. If it scares you, that is okay. I think my time is up. My timer just went off. I hope that was all right. Little inkling as to what I'm up to.
That was perfect. And perfect timing as well, John. If you can't get rid of the fear, if you can't beat the fear, do it scared. Do you remember, like, no fear stickers back in the day?
Yeah.
That sounds pretty much like one of them. If you take it off screen share, John, then you'll get rid of that annoying chat box as well.
Sure. My mouse is now frozen. Do what you can to carry on without me, mate.
That's all right. I'll be able to do that. There we go. Sorted.
Brilliant. Excellent.
Well, thank you so much. So again, there's a couple of comments there that have come in the chat. John, you might want to have a little read of them and pick up on them in your breakout room in just a second. But yeah, there's some good thoughts and some good comments. What inspired you about what John just said there? There's a number I know that in the rooms are actually in coastal communities. And so exactly what you were saying will be in terms of contextualizing what the gospel might look like. We'll speak more obviously, but there's a whole load of principles about the setting up of libraries. Someone's put a comment in the box about that whole idea of setting up libraries as a social enterprise that is exhibiting and demonstrating the gospel message can happen in lots of ways, not just with water sports. And so no doubt there's people in the room that are also thinking about that kind of a model and seeing whether that will work. Okay, guys, I'm going to move on and highlight here Hayley, who's going to talk to us about, I've got to say, because like I'm a northerner, a missional chippy, my life, that really rings my bell. So I'm delighted to be able to hear something about this. Over to you, Hayley.
Yeah, it's cool. The big question is chips or curry sauce, isn't it? That's a gravy.
Both.
So, yeah, I'm just sharing this. I want to introduce you to a guy called Neil. Neil was a trained Baptist minister and was called to a church in a white working class area in Birmingham. So I'm going to share my screen, tell you a bit of, you can see his story, and then I'll talk about how they've woven faith into the community briefly.
I'm Neil Roberts. I'm the minister at Chelmsford Baptist Church, which is in East Birmingham or North Surrey Hull. When I came here straight from college back in 1994, and I felt very strongly at that point a call to ministry in this sort of area. It's what would have been called a white working class estate. One of the issues we face, which many small churches face, is how do you make a place sustainable? The congregation isn't very big, and it's certainly not very wealthy. We had a large building that was in a very rundown condition, wasn't covering its costs at all, and needed a lot of work doing. And we felt very strongly in the early days then that God was saying, well, let's do something. We did discuss, well, do we need a building? And typically and unsurprisingly, the church said, of course we do. But what I found inspiring from the church's discussions was they all said it's not just us, we all need a building, we need a place where people can meet that belongs to us as a community. So we established 3 trees, which basically meant a place where everyone can come. So for some people, 3 trees is where they come to the cafe. For other people, they do dog training or they have a parent toddler group here. For other people, it's where they come and meet as a church. It took us 10 years, but part of that vision was the building looks after itself, pays for itself, and also doesn't belong to the church, it belongs to everyone. And I think that's probably one of our main drives, is that this isn't a church, it's the community's home. And the church provide an element of sanctuary and spirituality into that. Part of the regeneration process, they built some new units just around the corner from us, and we thought, wouldn't it be great to have a fish and chip shop? And then we thought, well, wouldn't it be great if it belonged to the community, because the previous owners ran a good fish and chip shop, but they didn't live locally. So all the profits went off the estate. And we thought, well, it could support the local economy, it could give people jobs. So when the unit came up, there was us, the Baptist Church, with a lot of support from HEBA. The local Anglican Church were involved, the Olive Branch, which is the cafe based here, the community centre itself, because that's a different trustee board, and a local consultancy firm on social enterprises. The 4 of us got together and we opened the UK's first community-owned fish and chip shop. That profit goes back into our community to support whatever people need. If they need to get, trip to the seaside, a youth worker, support with older people, people with health needs, whatever it is, the community has a resource now that's ours, and we can decide what we do with it. So it fits in with our kind of vision around how do we make these places sustainable, how do we make communities sustainable. Our faith and our worship life is part of everyone's life here, and most people know, not everyone, but most people know there's a church here as well. They don't probably quite know how that fits. When we do things like prayer and fasting, we just make it a normal thing. We just say, this is what the people within the building are doing of faith. So it's trying to mainstream, I suppose, spirituality into the life of here, so people know alongside everything else, God is somehow part of this. I suppose in terms of the future, God's given us a much firmer base to work from now, and that must be for a reason. So I think God can only want us to keep growing the family. That's the only reason we're here. We're not here to just be a nice building. So I would like to see more of God's friends and family come in.
Sorry, it stops really abruptly, so forgive me for that. But I asked Neil to just explore a little bit about what weaving faith into community life looked like, and he shared this with me. He said it wouldn't happen without the church being here. The building provides a place of shalom and hope like no other in our estate. We're not claiming to be the only light here. Other churches are working hard in the area, but we're unique in the approach we have. Church life is key to this. The church family is active and growing. We've been specifically working with how we can offer spirituality in the midst of activities at the centre. We found that the traditional outreach approach just doesn't work. Instead, we take a broader kingdom understanding, and that has seen slow but steady growth for us, as well as the church being regarded as a normal and positive part of life. We are seen as contributing not just to our own pet projects, but have been involved at every level of community life, with elected members, council officers, the Regeneration Partnership, school and police. This hasn't always made everyone our friend, but we are seen as people who will stand up for what we believe in. And then he goes on to share some of his story. So I don't know much about it apart from that. I'm just drawn to that idea of a kind of, many of us are in the places where we have these traditional buildings, and what do we do and how do we invest them in community? And his story is really key. The video can be found on the Heart of England Baptist Association YouTube channel, and I'll pop that in the chat in a bit. Thanks, Carl.
Thanks so much, Hayley. That was really, really helpful. What a great idea that is as well. So Where we're going to go now, we're going to have just a little moment again to catch breath and to think what are the things that inspired you about that idea and that presentation, about them all, and what questions will you be able, or are you able to raise? So there's going to be about 20 minutes. Effectively, we've probably got about 15-20 minutes to talk in these breakout rooms now.
Okay, thanks ever so much. Hope you enjoyed the breakout rooms, and boy, has it been a full-on morning. And I don't think we've even had a coffee break yet, so you're probably looking forward to that in a bit. But we're going to continue now, and I want us to mute if we can, if we're not on mute already, to mute. And this is a time for us to ask questions to those who've taken part this morning. And again, just want to say a big thank you to those guys. Oh my goodness, there's been so much in what's been shared, isn't it? So I suspect there's going to be quite a few questions coming in. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to use the chat box for these questions, and as they populate, we'll try and get through them. I'd like other members of the team, if you think that we've missed a question that needs to be posted or discussed, then please let us know. So when you're posting your question in chat, can you put the name of the presenter that you actually would like to pose that question to, or if it's just a general one, just say general, okay? So please crack on with your questions. I've got one question from earlier, and this is to Matt. Matt, how do you bring Jesus into the space in what you're doing?
Almost forgot to unmute. Yeah, I think in our breakout group we kind of talked about that a little bit. I didn't mention to anyone that wasn't in that group, I didn't mention that we have us three directors are part of three separate churches, and the church that I'm part of meets in Waffle on a Sunday. So we very much look to we whilst keeping Waffle and the church separate, we also we look to engage with people when people are engaging around faith issues, or just express any kind of interest. It's a really nice and easy way to kind of move them into a Christian community on a Sunday. We say, hey, come along, and then we give that Sunday hour. Someone asked me in the group whether that Sunday church looks anything like conventional church, and the answer is yes. But we do kind of centralize discipleship, so we try and make it so that when Bob comes from a mental health support group and you say, okay, come along on a Sunday, it's the same place that he's been coming along to. It's a lot of the same people. And then we keep doing one-to-ones in our church, and we prioritize small groups so that kind of culture of relationship building that he's used to is the same or similar when he gets to church. But obviously there it's very much, we're very clear that this is we're a faith community, that we are here to follow Jesus. So there's a real kind of clear step between the two, but hopefully quite a small step for people to make in terms of shifting culture. So that's really, I think, probably the easiest way to answer that question, I think, Dave.
Yeah, thanks so much, Matt. Just one more for you, Matt. With the services that you provide, I'm assuming that they're not completely free because it needs to be a sustainable model. But how do you deal with people who can't afford the food or the drinks or whatever, and would love to be part of the community?
Great question. Really good question. So yeah, everything. So the Waffle workspace, we've got collaborative workspace that's free to access, and a Waffle play space, soft play area, that's going to be free to access. So the main revenue is driven through the cafe, if you like. We offer people the opportunity there to do community tipping, so they can tip their community, give more, and that obviously it helps in terms of supporting the income. But we've got wooden community cards. So that's like a kind of community currency. and we work with the food bank and the schools, and we hand them out to people with free school meals or in the community or in the receiving the food bank. So they're worth £5, and they can. So then people can use them. If that's our way of trying to engage with families that might be on low incomes, to make sure that they feel like they can come and have a place there. And that's been really successful. And because we also offer them out as a pay it forward system in the cafes, you can buy one and then we'll hand them out and just give people free coffee and waffles all day long, which is really fun to do. It means there's no stigma attached to the cards themselves, so that people can, people that are redeeming one, you don't know whether they were a food bank person or just bought as a gift card. So that works well. And we also we really try and make a big deal out of saying to people, look, if you want to just sit here, use this space and just get a glass of water, we really push that message, because we don't want people to feel like they need to buy anything. We want people to feel free to just sit and be.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. And I'm amazed you've had no sleep last night. I think you're doing amazingly well. So there was a question about advice on starting a charity. You'll see in the chat box, actually, there's been a great link there. Thanks, Andy, for posting that. Question for Will. How do you keep the vision alive and stay attentive to the ripple effect of what God is up to? Over the last couple of weeks, I've woken up to the fact that if I'm not careful, I can become the grant application person rather than being attentive to the ripple effect. Great question there. Thanks, Kay.
Great question. I don't really do. I'm a bad manager, basically. So I just let everyone get on with it themselves. I spent most of the last 3 days watching the England cricket team lose. People always laugh at that, but it's actually about making space to not have to do stuff. There's a phrase that I was taught ages ago about working on the business or in the business. So when you work in the business, that's like doing the actual work. So could be putting out the church chairs every Sunday. But when you work on the business, that's thinking about what's next for the business. So I just have to make sure in my mind that I'm doing as much on the business as I am in the business, which means basically carving out time where you're not having to do any work, where you are, getting out water sports equipment or making coffees, or, the van breaks down and they might want me to go and rescue someone 10 miles away in my car. And I have to say, well, actually, I haven't got time for that. And I think that's one of the hardest things of leadership, isn't it? Is saying, this is thinking time. I'm not going to help the business. So that's how I do it, is just try and avoid doing too much work.
Thanks, Will. And that's a really important message for each of us, isn't it? Okay, this is from Hannah, and to all those who've spoken today. Questions from a personal perspective: how do you deal with friends and family who maybe not doubt you, but seem doubtful that your project, idea, business won't work? And how do you deal with the negative people? Thanks so much, Hannah.
Well, Napoleon always says he wanted lucky generals, not good ones. So I just rely on that and tell myself that life is fundamentally not about what I do, but how I respond to what happens. So in a sense, negative people tend to be focusing on what could happen, whereas people who are lucky tend to respond to what does happen. So for me personally, it's remembering that all of life is effectively a bit of a game. And the gap between success and failure is very small. So when people are saying it won't work, the answer is, yeah, it probably won't. But what if it did? And so that what if it did work?
Yeah. John, can I ask you to come in, because obviously you're still very much in the fledgling stage of this adventure down the south coast. These doubts and whatever, did you want to speak into that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of doubts when you're doing something like this, and I think for me, my experience has been that that my own inner voice probably is more negative than anybody else around me. I doubt myself more than other people do. Most of the comments that I've got and received about the idea have been positive. I think there's probably people around me who don't understand pioneering and what it is and all that kind of stuff. And that's okay, because they generally want to find out more and it's a discussion. But yeah, I think anything negative, I think you handle that in the same way that you handle any other normal negativity in church or about your calling, and you go back to I try and go back to my identity as a child of God, and I think that's the only thing that will fix that deep neediness. You don't want to build a church or a business out of that neediness, do you? Like wanting to be loved. And I think the the thing that can fix that is knowing you're a child of God and that you're loved.
And I think often, Dave, the highest risk is believing the good news, not the bad news about yourself.
Yeah.
People often say I'm great, and I was like, nah, I'm not really. I often think ultimately the bit that will get me down isn't the negative people; it's believing the good stuff, which isn't always any more true than the negative.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you. Guys, I tell you what, we've got more questions here, but we're going to have to call that a day. Carl, do you want to say something about people being able to connect with each other outside of this group? Before you do that, can I just say how thrilled I am that we've been able to do this across 4 associations, bringing people together. I think it's the first time we've ever done it. I hope it's not going to be the last thing. And it's one of those examples, isn't it, how COVID's been awful, but actually there's been opportunities during COVID to do things a bit different. This is one of them, and I've really, really appreciated it. So Carl, this thing about connecting with one another post the meeting, questions that perhaps are burning to ask, how do we get those questions out to the different people?
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for all of those questions. I know not everyone got their question answered. Just to say that I've just put in the chat the link. That's the channel, the YouTube channel, where you'll find the video later today. And in the description box of that video, I'll try and put some useful links and as much as possible, how to connect with each of the speakers who you've heard today. So speakers, if you want to drop into the chat box, however it is that you want people to connect with you, bearing in mind it's going in the description box of a YouTube video. So it might be your email address, or it might be a contact page of your website, or whatever it is. But just some way that that people who are watching back and seeing what you're saying can get in direct contact with you. The other thing to say is that from a point of view of our 4 associations, those of you that are in the room that are part of the Baptist world, so Southern Counties, South West, Webnet and South Wales, we do act very closely together as a group, and it's been a privilege today, I echo what Dave's just said, to do this together. In terms of the future, it would be great to be able to share resources between us. Every single one of you in the room has got stories that's worth hearing, and it's how to share that and to network together. So I'd love for you, if you're interested in that, please just let us know, either through whichever rep it is, Dave, Alistair, Hayley or myself, your home mission rep, if this is something that is helpful and the sharing together in larger groups from time to time might be useful. Don't think we're going to give up meeting in smaller groups when we can, to actually pray with each other, to eat together around a table, and just to have that sense of closeness of relationship within a geographical space. But clearly today's benefited from experience that's come from far bigger than just one patch. And so it'd be good to be able to draw that again. So let us know if that's something that would interest you. Also, the particular things that would help you, grant funding, more about this, whatever it might be, that would be helpful in the future. And just on this whole area of missional entrepreneurship. So we have had a conversation about how we use the home mission funds that we have available. We are not stopping making them available to established churches for the things that established churches engage with, so long as it's highly missional. Then of course they will still be able to apply. But I think what we want to do is to say, look, if God's put something on your heart that looks like something like you've heard today on the screen, can you have a conversation with us? It's not to say that we're going to have enough money to bankroll the whole thing, but just in terms of maybe the expertise that can be offered to get things up and running, and also possibly some money towards establishing something. We want to say, look, if there is something that is on the heart of God that He's laid on your heart, then we want to walk with you on that journey. And we know that sometimes that's going to be risky. And we know that not every grant that we give is ever stonewall successful. And as someone said in our group, neither are we anymore looking for the amount of bums on seats it translates to the following Sunday service, or the amount of Dunkins that you've managed to get in this particular quarter, baptisms, much as that's a wonderful thing. So we want to celebrate those things, and we want to say, of course, we think those things are important, but it's not all about that. And so our funding shouldn't just be to that end, is what I'm saying. So so please, if you can get in contact with us, and let's have a conversation. I can't make promises, but I can say that we would welcome those conversations, all 4 associations and together. Great. Guys, I'm going to come into a land just at the moment. You might be able to save the chat box if you want to. If in your chat box you've got a little square with 3 dots, if you click on the 3 dots, most of you will have an opportunity to save chat as one of the options, and you can save the entire chat box to your own computer. But like I say, the important links that are on it will be in the description box of that YouTube video. Right, I'm going to hand over to my esteemed colleague that I'm now desperately looking for on a large screen of people. Alistair, do you want to come off mute, Alistair, and speak, and then I'll be able to see you.
Yeah, I'm off mute, Carol. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can do.
Yeah.
Just to finish off. Thank you, mate.
Yeah, no, thank you. And well, thank you again, everyone, for for being part of this today. And real special thanks to Matt, to Will, and to John, and also to Neil in his physical absence. Sounds a bit kind of theological, doesn't it? But it's great to have heard what you guys have shared with us today. And I'm not just saying that because it's a polite thing that you do at the end of something like this. You really have, you've inspired us, and you've motivated us. You've challenged us. You know, I'm finding myself just reflecting on quite a number of things, you know, that I just want to give a bit more thought to. And I think also as well, which I think is really important, I think our faith quotient has risen today. You know, I think there's been something about, wow, this is, you know, this, you know, there are a whole variety of ways that we can be creative in, you know, in the mission of God that God has called us to share in and to be a part in. I guess you've got your own highlights and lessons that you'll take from today. I think I've got a few highlights. You know, I think when I grow up, I want to become a waffle ninja. That just sounds so good, Dad, doesn't it? You know, I think my life has missed its true path, really. You know, I was born to be a waffle ninja, and I love that. That is just brilliant. And the thing about choosing people over projects, that seems really important, doesn't it? You know, it's not about the projects, it's about the people. And because the God that we serve is a God who is personal, who's relational, it's about the people. And also the importance of listening. I don't know about you, but I find this is a lesson I continually need to be relearning all the time, you know. And so that was really helpful again to be reminded of that today. And then that thing about trying to weave faith into community life, not just about bringing God into the everyday things of life, whether it's the marketplace, the community, the church, well, hopefully the church building as well. In terms of lessons, what does success look like? What impact do we choose to measure what we're doing by? That question, can God work anywhere? Can God work on the water? Can God work in the cafe context or in the furniture bank context? And then I think that challenge, I guess, that comes to each of us as to, I wonder what burden, what vision is God laying on your heart? Or maybe it's a deepening thing. Maybe today you've come with something that's kind of on your heart, but God has just really kind of deepened that sense of wanting to pursue that and to follow that, and to be able to do that in ways that are financially sustainable. Then the value of learning to ask questions, you know, of just you know, of just being in the moment and being able to ask questions that enable people to engage with us and to engage with them. And then finally, just want to leave one question with you yourself. What's your one takeaway from today? What thing are you going to take away from today and reflect on and pray through and maybe, you know, start beginning to pray that through with others, to discuss with others whatever it is that you've felt God kind of laying in your heart. So I just want to say a big thank you again. I'm going to wind up with a prayer now. And yeah, I tell you what we'll do. I'll wind up with a prayer now, and then I'll invite us all to unmute ourselves, and then we're going to have the craziest saying of the grace that you have ever heard. Now, if you do it with 6 people, it's a bit of a cacophony, but if you've got 80 people, this could be a heavenly choir of the grace. Who knows? So I'll lead us in a prayer, and then we'll unmute, and then yeah, we'll do that. So Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for a real sense of your voice, your presence in all of this. We pray for Matt, for Will, for John, for Neil. And we pray that as they have encouraged us, that you would, in your grace, encourage them. And pray that you would give to them, as they look to the future, a massive sense of your presence, your journeying presence with them. A really special sense of your peace and of your power, empowering them. And for ourselves, we pray that today won't be a flash in the pan for us, but we pray that we'll continue to hear your voice as we reflect on what we think you've been saying to us today. Help us to get a sense of what your next step for us will be, whether that's in terms of what we're currently doing, or whether that might be in terms of something new that you want us to explore. And more broadly, we pray that you'll help us to hear your voice as we journey out of lockdown, and that you'll give us a sense of what in the future you're calling us to be and calling us to do. And we pray this in the name of Jesus, who is so amazing, so incredible, and the one we follow. Amen. So guys, I'm going to invite you to unmute yourselves. You might even want to turn the volume up full, who knows, you know. And so let's go for it. May the grace
Praise our Lord Jesus Christ,
and the
and the love of God,
and the
and the
fellowship
fellowship of the Holy Spirit,
with
with
us
us
all.
all. Amen.
Amen.
Wow, it was a heavenly choir after all, wasn't it? Really. Bless you guys.